And welcome back. So, what if the story of Pablo Escobar wasn't about the kingpin himself, but about the son who had to live with his legacy? That's the premise behind Hulu's Dear Killer Nannies, a crime drama that tries to tell a deeply personal story but doesn't quite hit the mark. The series follows Juan Pablo Escobar, now known as Sebastian, and what makes it unique is that the story is narrated by him. It moves between two timelines, one where he's naive 7-year-old, another where he's a teenager suddenly pulled into the chaos after his father's death. At first glance, it sounds compelling, a child growing up surrounded by cartel violence, completely unaware of what his father really does, and then being forced to confront that reality in the most brutal way possible. But the execution, that's where things starts to fall apart. The show constantly jumps between timelines 1984 and 1993, and instead of building depth, it creates a fragmented narrative. Just as you begin to settle into one version of one's life, the story shifts again, and the emotional connection never fully sticks. As a child, Juan or Wampy is portrayed as completely oblivious. Sorry, he sees his father as a hero, a Robin Hood figure who helps the poor, while casually spending time with his so-called nannies, who are actually cartel hitmen. And yet the show leans into that contrast, like a moment where they hand a young boy a gun to finish off an injured animal. It's meant to be shocking, but instead of adding depth, it often feels exaggerated, almost surreal in a way that doesn't quite land emotionally. Then we have Teenage One. This is where stories should get more intense, especially with Escobar's death and the rise of full blown cartel war. But even here, the character feels underdeveloped. He is less of a fully realized person and more of a placeholder moving through major historical events. And that's the biggest issue with Dear Killer Nannies. It never truly explored its characters. The killer nannies themselves, who should be one of the most fascinating aspects of the story, end up feeling like a generic interchangeable thugs. That's very little insight into who they are or why they are entrusted with raising a child in such a dangerous environment. Even Pablo Escobar, played by John, only appears briefly, though to be fair, he does make an impact. In just a few scenes, he captures both sides of Escobar, the ruthless criminal and the charismatic public figure. But it's not enough. The show raises big question about legacy, identity, and the cost of growing up in a world built on violence but never dives deep enough to answer them. And while once Pablo narration adds an interesting layer, it also creates distance. You're constantly reminded that this is a retelling, possibly shaped by memory, perspective, or even bias, which could have been powerful, but instead it just adds to the disconnect. In the end, Dear Killer Nannies had an intriguing concept, telling the story of Pablo through his son's eyes, but the storytelling feels so scattered and shallow to make it truly engaging. It's not that the story isn't interesting, it's that the show never fully commits to telling it. So if you are deciding whether to watch, this one might be a skip. Thank you for watching. Bye.